Hello, welcome back to Covered True Crime. Today's unsolved case is on Brandon Victor Swanson. Where did Brandon Swanson go after crashing his car into a ditch in the middle of the night? Brandon Swanson was born on January 30, 1989, in Marshall, Minnesota, U.S., a son to Brian and Antoinette Swanson. Brandon was only 19 years old when he went missing. He was last seen in Marshall, Minnesota on May 14, 2008. Brandon was a 2007 high school graduate of Marshall Senior High School. He was also a freshman enrolled in a one-year program in wind turbines at Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby, Minnesota. On May 13, 2008, Minnesota West Community and Technical College academic year ended. To celebrate, Brandon attended two parties his friends had thrown. The first party Swanson attended was in Lynn, Minnesota, 7 miles away from his home in Marshall. Brandon left the party to attend another party, a drive 40 minutes away from Lynn and Canby, Minnesota, the last sightings of Swanson. Brandon had consumed alcohol, according to his friends who attended both parties. Swanson's friends stated he was not intoxicated from what they could see. Brandon left the party by midnight to drive back home by himself. Swanson, a native of the area, knew the directions to get back home to Marshall, but he ran into some trouble by crashing his Chevy Lumina into a small ditch. He was uninjured. Not being able to get out of the ditch, Brandon called his parents at 1:45 a.m. to pick him up and provided Brian and Annette, his parents, the directions to where he was located. Brian said he was midway between Lynn and Marshall, a 30-minute drive from his home. Both of his parents drove to the area where Brandon had provided his whereabouts but could not see him. Brian called Brandon's cell phone to ask if he could see their headlights and honks, and Brandon said he heard and saw nothing. That's when his parents knew that Brandon had given them the wrong directions. Brandon was frustrated because he was confident he was providing the right direction to his parents. Brandon stayed on the phone with his mother and said he will leave his car and start walking toward the lights he could see in the distance, which he assumed was the town of Lent. Brandon would stay on the phone with his parents for 47 minutes, and around 2:30 a.m., Brandon screamed, "Oh, shh!" And that's when the call ended. Brandon's father called Brandon back multiple times, but Brandon never picked up. Brandon's parents called the police around 6:30 a.m. to report him missing due to not hearing from him for hours and searching throughout the night. Brandon, at the age of 19 years old, is considered an adult, so the police did not take the report seriously. A few hours later, the police agreed to open a missing person case and started searching. Police obtained Brandon's cell phone records and concluded Swanson was not in Lynn. Not even close to the town. He was near a small town called Taunton, 25 miles away from Lynn. Brandon's vehicle was found in a ditch in Taunton, confirming the location. A ground search was launched by helicopters and bloodhounds were brought into the investigation. The dogs followed a scent trail through an abandoned farm and past fields leading to the river, Yellow Medicine River. The water was 15 feet at the time. Brandon's case was handed over to the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Investigation in 2010. A tip line was set up, and by 2015, there were 90 leads reported, but nothing has turned up. Brandon's law, named for Swanson, was passed later in 2008. The law requires Minnesota police to begin an immediate search for missing adults under 21, as well as older adults who are missing under suspicious circumstances. Swanson's case remains unsolved. When an individual dies and the cause of death is unknown or uncertain, investigators employ the psychological autopsy or equivocal death analysis. Using the elements of the psychological autopsy, Brandon's disappearance was analyzed using an equivocal missing person analysis in order to explore possible explanation of Brandon's mysterious disappearance. Voluntary disappearance. Although it is possible that Brandon disappeared on his own accord, and it is alive and well, living in another location, perhaps under an alias, this scenario is extremely unlikely. There is no evidence that Brandon was planning his disappearance, and it takes a high level of sophistication to plot your own disappearance and relocation. It has also been over a decade since Brandon went missing, and for a fraud of this nature to last that long without detection is unlikely. It should also be considered that Brandon was on the phone with his father while attempting to walk toward a location so his father could pick him up. Hardly the behavior of someone staging his own disappearance. A mental breakdown. A mental breakdown does not seem like a plausible cause of Brandon's disappearance, although it cannot be ruled out entirely. Family and friends indicated that Brandon had always been a high-functioning and emotionally stable individual, and for his whereabouts not to be discovered for over a decade makes the mental breakdown explanation highly unlikely. An accident. Authorities immediately assumed that Brandon had fallen into the Yellow Medicine River. After over a decade and innumerable searches of the river, it is highly implausible Brandon drowned in the river because his body likely would have surfaced by now. The present search is now focusing on another body of water in the area, Mud Creek. The same argument holds true for Mud Creek, so it would be a mistake to focus all of the search efforts on that location. It is also not likely Brandon drowned because it was reported that until May 16, 2008, Brandon's cell phone remained turned on. His phone was thought to have been on for 2 days after his disappearance because every call made to the phone after his disappearance resulted in several rings and then a voicemail recording. When a cell phone is off or when it is damaged, for example, as a result of being submerged underwater, incoming calls go directly to voicemail, either with no rings or just one ring. How could Brandon's phone still be on for 2 days after he disappeared if Brandon did indeed drown? It is possible that he abruptly hung up on the phone while falling into the river, with the phone slipping out of his hand and falling onto dry land. However, the phone has not been recovered, and one can only speculate. It has also been postulated that Brandon may have sought shelter in a farmer's outer building and perished there. However, the probability of the building's owner not finding Brandon's remains after a decade is unlikely. The temperature the night Brandon disappeared was around 40 degrees Fahrenheit with light winds, hardly conditions under which one would perish of exposure within a matter of hours. Another possibility is that Brandon could have fallen into a hole or a type of naturally occurring trench encountered while walking in the dark. But if that were the case, it would be odd that after over a decade of extensive searching, nothing has been found. Unaliving oneself, or S. S is the least plausible scenario because it is highly unusual for S victims to take measures that would prevent or delay the discovery of their remains. If S were the case, Brandon's body would have been discovered rather quickly. Brandon did not have a history of emotional instability, nor did he show any signs leading up to his disappearance that he was S or depressed. He also placed phone calls to his parents to pick him up, which is not the behavior of someone planning to take his own life. Homicide. There are no known personal, economic, or social motives that plausibly may have driven someone to unalive Brandon. However, there are individuals who unalive strangers because of a deep-seated, usually sexual fantasy. Because Brandon's fate is still unknown, it can be speculated that he was taken by an offender, unalived, and disposed of so his remains will not be found. The likelihood that an offender, especially one with homicidal fantasies, happened to be driving in rural Minnesota at 3 a.m. on the same road Brandon was on is remote, but still needs to be considered. Another possibility is that this could be a case of vehicular homicide. An individual may have been driving home intoxicated and accidentally hit Brandon. Gravel rural roads are not illuminated with streetlights and visibility is poor. It is possible a possible hit-and-run driver panicked and in fear of going to prison took and disposed of Brandon's body to avoid detention. Hi, I'm Nati, and if you reached this end of the video, thank you for listening to Brandon Swanson's case. To date, Brandon has not been found, not him in person, nor his remains. His case is surrounded in mystery. As you can see, we went over equivocal analysis on circumstances surrounding his disappearance, on possible theories of what could have happened, where they narrowed it down, where unaliving of oneself could not be possible. I think the most logical explanation could have been vehicular homicide, where it was dark, maybe there was someone there that was driving and accidentally hit Brandon, and they panicked and feared, and they did not want to be held responsible. So it's possible that they took Brandon and whatever belongings he had on him, which was his keys and his cell phone, due to the fact that hasn't been found. When the vehicle was found, the keys was missing, as it's been believed that Brandon had his keys and his phone on him. So there was nothing found in the vehicle, and everything was intact, just like the way he stated. And when they did have the search dogs, they did follow a scent up and through the woods, up into the river, and a little bit past to the river. So it's almost like something happened there, and it's possible he tried to run away, perhaps from someone, because there was something that he's seen that I believe for him to yell those words. It was an explicitive, something that startled him. And if you think about I can never pronounce that. Vehicle homicide. I'm just going to say vehicle homicide. You also have to take into account the conversation that Brandon had with his mother. They were on the phone for about 47 minutes, and they were on the phone up until the time that he said those explicitives, and that's when they didn't hear anything else. Now, his mother went on to have an interview on one of the news stations, and I was going to post that, but there wasn't much information that was gathered that I would think it's anything of value. Because if it would have been vehicle homicide, you would have heard the car probably trying to brake, screeching on the grass or the gravel. You could have heard an impact. And I don't know if investigators asked Brandon's mother these questions, that they were not found and they were not discussed in the interview that I did find. So that's why I said I did not include it in this episode. So that is the most likely scenario. Also, to this day, they are still expanding on the searches, but there's a lot of farmers that live in the area, and these farmers are not willing to allow the search teams to go into their farmland and to dig up their crops. Now, understandably, and also you can probably argue that, well, maybe it's a bit suspicious that they wouldn't want search and rescue. What do you have to hide? But then at the same time, you have to understand that farmers don't make but so, from what I understand, that is their livelihood, that is their income. And if you're digging up their crops, that is going to destroy the value and the crops. So I also read that they have been trying to work with these farmers, as well as going in out of season where, crops are not really growing at the time. But it's been pretty much, there goes my cats coming in my room. It hasn't been successful. So I don't know. It's one of these cases that it's really chilling, and it's very sad if this happened to anyone. So just imagine his parents, that almost 2 decades later, and there's no clue. There hasn't been any more leads. Like, I will be following this case as well, and there hasn't been any more leads as far as, other than they're trying to expand their searches. Now, one thing that I also wanted to talk about, I have my cat here, is that I'm not sure if you guys are all aware, there has been many disappearances when it comes to a lot of national parks and national parks, where the Appalachian Trails, certain, just national parks where hikers are disappearing, especially when they're by themselves, or if you're in a party together and somebody just, the party just decides to separate. Where, I know it seems a little bit off topic, but it kind of plays in together, because when they disappear, they can't find these hikers that go on in these national parks to do what they do, whether they're hunting, whether they're hiking for entertainment or whatever, just to have a good time. And when they disappear, they can't find anything. They can't even find their rifle. They can't find a piece of clothing. So you have to rule out animals, because if there was an animal or a bear, they would find an article of clothing or a torn piece of clothing, but there would be nothing. They just completely disappeared. And it makes you wonder, being that it was dark, they don't have answers to those individuals that mysteriously disappeared. Could it be the same circumstances? Because it's just really, really sad, and it's just so confusing. Like, I think if we had a better understanding of what his parents heard on the other line, is it possible that they heard something, anything? If the phone if Brandon's phone fell because he was startled, if we're even talking about vehicle homicide, like I said, you would have heard something. You would have heard an impact. You would have heard something. The car screeching, trying to brake. But there's no indication that on the interview that their mother did hear anything like that, unless it's being withheld from the investigation, and the parents are not saying. So I know my heart goes out to his family. I'm pretty sure they want answers. And so this is why I do these videos, in case anyone knows anything about this information, or has a tip, or was in the area, can always call the number down below that I always provide, which is always submitted. You can submit it anonymously. But yeah, what do you guys think? What do you guys, what is your theory of what could have possibly happened to Brandon? The last theory is that I would take into effect would be spiritual. Um, Whether spiritual, I mean, I don't know if you guys, some people talk about Bigfoot and things like that. I don't think I'm into that type of belief, but I am a spiritual individual. And what if something spiritual happened? Because people just don't disappear like that. Or extraterrestrial, the fact that nothing could be heard on the other line. Do you think that is possible as well? What do you guys think? I will be following this case, so whatever updates I get, I will be letting you guys know, of course. So stay tuned for that. And thank you so much for listening and being a part of Brandon's story. Once again, if you have any tips, or if you know anything about this case, or was in the area, you can call the number down below. And until next time, I look forward to seeing you with an all new case. Please take care of yourself and be safe. Bye.